Hello, everybody. This talk is about how the Shakespeare project was brought into being according to an ancient Hermetic science, wherein the planetary and stellar phenomena in the sky were suitably echoed on Earth according to some particularly important and meaningful cryptic signs that were given. Those signs being a series of novas and supernovas taking place in key positions in the sky and at key moments associated with the 60-year sequence of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions. The Shakespeare project was a key part of the Rosicrucian work of the English Golden and Rosy Cross Society, with the Shakespeare fraternity being part of the society. And there was indeed a Shakespeare fraternity. It was composed of a group of people of varied talents and various ways of contributing, much like theatre and films of today require many people performing a variety of roles to make them happen. For instance, in the Shakespeare fraternity, there were the main poets, of course, but there were also patrons, some of whom were poets, who could share stories and provide libraries, sponsorship, and inspiration. There were philosopher lawyers from the Inns of Court, some of them poets, who could research, discuss ideas, and share in the invention. Invention means the creative stories. Then there were intelligencers who could provide historical and current information and intelligence. And there were secretaries and amanuenses who could write what was dictated to them and make copies. And last but not least, there were professional actors who could supply ideas and practical details. And all these were led and inspired by the main poet and his twin, as the Shakespeare fraternity was working consciously and deliberately with the fundamental law of the universe, the law of two, the law of partnership, the law of friendship, the law of lover and beloved. For it takes two to express love, or indeed to express anything at all. Without the law of two, there would be nothing. And when done with love, with friendship, then light or delight is created, which is the third. And then, as you know, there are many types of love and many ways to create or delight. As Hamlet says, to be or not to be, that is the question. For even being and not being is a polarity, a twinship. A key to being is given in the first 5 verses of the first chapter of the first book of the Holy Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 5, wherein the Hebrew name for God is Elohim, nowadays pronounced and spelt Elohim. Elohim, or Elohim, is a plural name and refers to Al, the Divine Father, and Allah, the Divine Mother, in their unity of love, and who in a yin-yang way make or become heaven and earth. Then by means of the love expressed between the two, light is created, which light is a delight, joy, happiness, which is what the Hebrew word or, translated as light, means. Let me say this more clearly. The duality is essentially the Divine Father and Mother. who are heaven and earth in a yin-yang way, which means that each has something of the other. When the Divine Father and Mother, or heaven and earth, actively love each other, they light up and shine with delight. This duality, or double duality, is what the Gemini myth is essentially about. And the Greek word Gemini means twins. And this is the essence of the Hermetic science, which is a labor of love. And this science is summarized in the phrase, as above, so below, as below, so above, for the doing of the great work. Now, so successful has the 400-year-old Rosicrucian Shakespeare project been that it has had a worldwide transformational effect on humanity and still continues to do so. Not only this, but it contains and teaches essential truths that humanity needs to know. So, let me provide some detail. So for this, I'll share my screen. So let us start with the blazing star. Now, the blazing star is a symmetrical six-pointed star of light. And geometrically, it is a hexalpha formed from a hexagram of two interlaced equilateral triangles that are fused together as one. And the symmetrical hexagram is known as Solomon's seal. The blazing description of this symmetrical six-pointed star of light is derived from Blaise, the teacher of Merlin, as recounted in Celtic mythology. And the name is a synonym for the light of love, the light of Elohim, or God. And in celestial terms, the blazing star in Solomon's seal is associated with Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions. And Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions were of primary importance to the Magi of old, as also to the Magi of the European Renaissance. Now, the word Magi was originally a name for the Zoroastrian priests of Persia, and Persia's heartland was Iran, but at its greatest extent, it included the whole of the Middle and Near East. And the three Magi who visited the baby Jesus of Nazareth were Zoroastrian priests who, guided by the planets and stars, were seeking the seventh incarnation of their great prophet and master, Zoroaster. Later, the term Magi, singular magus, referred to all notable masters of the occult sciences throughout Europe, as well as the Middle and Near East. And these so-called occult sciences were the Hermetic arts, which included astronomy, astrology, Kabbalah, alchemy, geomancy, and other forms of esoteric knowledge. And during the European Renaissance, the occult societies of Europe were known as Magian societies, with each society led by a magus, or sometimes several magi. The term magus still survives in the modern-day English words mage, magician, and magic, but such magic is an all-embracing science, and the magi or magicians were skilled scientists whose practice was an art. Now, the Hermetic work can be summed up by the phrase, as above, so below, as below, so above, for the doing of the great work. Above refers to heaven, the spiritual world of divine wisdom and intelligence, from whence comes inspiration. That's the breath of life that bears the wisdom. But above also refers to the sky, with the stars, planets, and other stellar phenomena being seen as an ongoing expression of the divine wisdom and intelligence. Below refers to Earth, the natural world, which receives the wisdom via inspiration and then has the free will choice of either acting it out or not. Below also refers to our planet Earth, which lies under the sky and contains all earthly or natural things that are within it and supported by it. Above can be symbolized by the sun, as the ecliptic, the sun's path encircles the ecliptic pole. This is also known as the occult pole because it's hidden. And the sun defines the starry celestial zodiac. Below can be symbolized by the moon, which encircles the planet Earth and receives and reflects the light of the sun. Above is the spiritual world, below is the natural world. The former is immortal, the latter mortal. The aim is to marry the two, so as to create the immortal mortal, the celestial soul. And this is known as the marriage of heaven and earth. And such a marriage creates light or delight, which is happiness or joy. Now, the term Hermetic is derived from Hermes, the Greek representation of a supreme magus and psychopomp who leads souls along the middle path, the road between heaven and earth. Heaven is known as the upper world or spiritual world, the world of immortal gods and goddesses, archangels and angels, who are all spirits. And earth is known as the underworld or natural world, the world of mortal natural souls, Greek word for that being psyches. These are the individual minds or intelligences of all natural forms of life, human and otherwise. Because everything has a mind or intelligence. Hermes is the immortal mortal, the celestial soul, or sometimes called the spiritual soul, who has married the two polarities, spirit and psyche, by means of innumerable labours of love. And for this reason, Hermes is known as Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice greatest. Now, Francis Bacon, who is one of the great Magi, in Book 1 of his 1605 Advancement of Learning, explains it thus: that triplicity, which in great veneration was ascribed to the ancient Hermes, the power and fortune of a king, the knowledge and illumination of a priest, and the learning and universality of a philosopher. Now, kingship, priesthood, and philosophy are associated with the three great pillars, two of which are known as the twin great pillars, the pillars of Atlas, Hercules, or Solomon. Kingship is associated with the right-hand sun pillar of wisdom, compassion, and mercy. Priesthood is associated with the left-hand moon pillar of intelligence, strength, and judgment. And philosophy is associated with the middle star pillar of harmony, beauty, and knowledge. And the right-hand sun pillar, known in Hebrew as Yarkin, is analogous to heaven. And the left-hand moon pillar, known in Hebrew as Boaz, is analogous to earth. Now, chemically, heaven is composed of the elements of fire and air, whilst earth is composed of the elements of water and earth. The middle star pillar, known in Hebrew as Mahaon, meaning the Great One, or in Freemasonry as Mahaboni, is analogous to the loving union of the two side pillars, a union referred to as marriage, which is a oneness in love. Now, alchemically, this love union or oneness produces ether, which is light, a light symbolized as the blazing star. This oneness as a maha on is the meaning of someone who is of the order of Melchizedek, because Melchizedek was the king priest of Salem, and Salem means peace. St. Paul, in his letter to the Hebrews, chapters 5 and 7, proclaims Jesus of Nazareth as such a king priest, which is the real meaning of the Hebrew word Messiah, translated into Greek as Christos and into English as Christ. And so for these reasons, the blazing star is also known as the Christ star or star of peace. Another well-known name is Star of David. David means beloved. Beloved. So Star of David really means Star of the Beloved. Now the great pillars are symbolic of the Gemini, which is Latin for twins, and the zodiac symbol for the Gemini is an icon representing the twin great pillars standing on a threshold and surmounted by a lintel, forming a doorway or gateway, the entrance to a temple. The birth of the Gemini children is told in the myth of Leda and the Swan. Leda, the Queen of Sparta, is impregnated on the same night by both the god Zeus, in the symbolic form of a swan, and her husband Tyndareus, the king of Sparta. And the result is that she gives birth to two sets of twins, born of two swan eggs, as shown in the picture. And each set of twins consists of a brother and sister. In the mythology, the immortals are known as Pollux and Helen, that's Helen of Troy, who are the children of Leda and Zeus. And the mortals are known as Castor and Clytemnestra, who are the children of Leda and Tyndareus. The story of the two brothers, the mortal Castor and the immortal Pollux, is given in the separate myth of the Gemini brothers. The two brothers loved each other dearly and had many adventures together. And when Castor died, Pollux was so grief-stricken that he offered to sacrifice his immortality so that his deceased mortal brother might be restored to life. And because of Pollux's intense self-sacrificial love for his mortal brother, and because Castor had loved Pollux, Castor was brought back to life, and Zeus allowed the two brothers to live on as immortal mortals. As immortal mortals, both Castor and Pollux were known as the Dioscuri, sons of Zeus, akin to Dionysus. As the Dioscuri, the Gemini brothers are symbolized as swans and represented in the sky by the constellation Cygnus. And the two brothers are also represented as knights riding white horses. And as shown in this emblem picture, the Dioscuri have swan eggshell helmets on their heads that flame with St. Elmo's fire. As such, they are known as Knights of the Helmet. They also hold long spears, and so are alternatively known as spear shakers or Shakespeares. Now, the idea of the Gemini and of the Great Pillars is embodied in the two equilateral triangles that form Solomon's seal. And each triangle is also cryptically represented by the letter A. Hence the two triangles are portrayed by two A's, known as the double A, AA, with one A inverted as a V. And the double A was used as far back in time as the ancient Egyptians and associated with the thrice greatest epithet. And the thrice greatest epithet of Hermes Trismegistus is derived from an epithet of Thoth, found at the Egyptian temple of Esna. Thoth, the great, the great, the great. And Thoth, the Egyptian ibis-headed god, is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of Hermes. And the Egyptian hieroglyph for the word great is AA, double A. Hence thrice greatest is rendered as AA, AA, AA. But it is found most simply as the double A. And the double A was the secret hieroglyphic signature of the Magian societies, later known as the Rosicrucians. And the double A is displayed prominently in stucco beneath the central picture in Francis I's long gallery in the Palace of Fontainebleau in France. And this was Francis I, Francois, to give it the French name. It was his private gallery, so no one else was allowed to enter it unless invited by the French king. Now, the double A was first printed in the form of a headpiece in a volume of Hebrew grammar made specially for Francis Bacon soon after he had arrived in Paris in 1576. And this headpiece headed the Decalogue, that means the Ten Commandments, that was printed in Hebrew with Latin translation on two extra pages inserted after the two Hebrew grammars, all of which were bound together with interleaved sheets of English-made paper containing Bacon's handwriting, in which he had translated the Hebrew into Greek, Chaldaic, Syriac, and Arabic. How's that? Not only does the headpiece display the two A's, but reclining on the two A's are the two Gemini brothers. And between them is shown a vase of fruit, signifying a cornucopia of good things, a holy grail. And the same AA Gemini headpiece appeared in De Republica Anglorum Instauranda, meaning of the instauration of an English republic, by Sir Thomas Challoner, published in London in 1579, the same year that Francis Bacon returned to England. So Francis Bacon probably brought that headpiece back with him to give to the English printer. And thereafter the AA signature started to be used in headpieces of books that were either written by or else sponsored by the Rosicrucian fraternity, including the Shakespeare works. So, for instance, the AA headpiece appears over the dedication in the 1593-1594 publication of Venus and Adonis, in which the name of William Shakespeare was first used as the author. It appears without the Gemini or the Holy Grail, and with just a small growth like a fleur-de-lis rising up between the two A's, which touch each other and have a tie binding them together. Then 30 years later, another type of AA headpiece was used in the 1623 Shakespeare First Folio. And this headpiece can be found in two places in the folio. One heading Hugh Holland's tributary poem in the 11-page preface. And the second one heading the actors' names on the unnumbered page opposite the first page of the Life of Henry V, It's a page numbered 69. And this time the Gemini is shown reclining on the two A's, but instead of a Holy Grail between them, a sheaf of corn is shown. Otherwise, the headpiece is more or less the same as the original AA Gemini headpiece printed on Francis Bacon's 1576 Hebrew grammar. Now, the double A in the form of Solomon's seal can be found in the sky, associated with a 60-year sequence of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions. The time lapse between each Saturn-Jupiter conjunction and opposition is approximately 10 years, with 20 years between each conjunction and 20 years between each opposition. A succession of 3 conjunctions and 3 oppositions mark out on the ecliptic 6 equally spaced points that mark the corners of a balanced hexagram or Solomon's seal. Moreover, Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions are known as great conjunctions. Hence, 3 of them provide 3 double A's, AA, 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 great, 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 which is the sign of Thoth, the thrice greatest, or Hermes Trismegistus. So these 3 greats define one of the 2 triangles of Solomon's seal. In other words, the triangle that is formed by the 3 Saturn-Jupiter great conjunctions is that of the immortal Thoth. The other triangle, which is defined by the 3 Saturn-Jupiter oppositions, therefore indicates the mortal twin, who is raised immortal by a loving interaction and ultimately a fusion with the immortal Thoth. For all these reasons, the 60-year rhythm of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions was a key feature for the Magi and for all the Magian societies of Europe during the European Renaissance. And when other remarkable and meaningful stellar events occur at key moments during one of these 60-year periods, it signals to the Magi that if they can sufficiently understand the message given by the celestial events and echo this message on earth with an appropriate work of service, then the Solomon's seal can metaphorically become a 6-pointed blazing star, the Star of David or Christ star, and produce a powerful transformative force for good on earth. Moreover, such blazing star celestial events are usually indicative of where a great master soul or supreme magus has incarnated on earth in order to guide and lead such work, with the incarnation often having been prophesied in advance so as to prepare the Magi. And this was true for the 1573 to 1623 blazing star appearance. Now, just 6 months before the 1573 Saturn-Jupiter opposition, a super bright supernova appeared in the Cassiopeia constellation in August 1572, which shone brighter than Venus and could easily be seen by the naked eye. And the sighting of this supernova was to last until March 1574, when the supernova disappeared from sight. To Theodore Beza, the Calvinist biblical scholar, and many others, it heralded the second coming of Christ. Now, this is because Cassiopeia is depicted as the enthroned Queen of Heaven, who, despite the more commonly known Cassiopeian myth, was seen by the Magi as a virgin queen, like Isis or the Virgin Mary. There's Cassiopeia here, I'm pointing to her. Cassiopeia also mainly appears as 5 bright stars in the Milky Way, forming the letter M for Mother or Mary, or reversed it appears as a W or 2 V's. The M can also be recognized as two A's, the double A, joined together as one. To the Magi of Europe, the supernova in Cassiopeia signaled that, just as the heavenly queen Cassiopeia had given birth to a child who suddenly blazed with light, so on earth a child of an earthly queen would do the same. And when the heavenly sphere and earthly globe were married together, as could be done with the celestial and terrestrial globes created by Gerardus Mercator, the Cassiopeia constellation was seen to coincide with the British Isles. And the only queen in the British Isles at that time was the Queen of England, Elizabeth I. And moreover, she had given birth secretly to a son who was given away at birth to be fostered by Lady Anne Bacon, née Cook. She's one of the Cook sisters, very learned. And Lady Anne Bacon was a leading lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth I. And as the wife of Sir Nicholas Bacon, the Queen's Lord Keeper of the Great Seal, she was the senior lady at court after the Queen. This adopted son was Francis Bacon, who showed a remarkable genius from a young age. And together with Sir Nicholas and Lady Anne's natural son, Anthony, Francis was brought up and given a special education by the Bacons and treated as their second son, the younger brother of Anthony. And Sir Nicholas Bacon was involved in the English Magian Society, with links to similar societies abroad. So part of the education was the passing on of ancient wisdom knowledge to Francis and Anthony. And the 1572 appearance of the supernova in Cassiopeia also helped confirm the naming of the English Magian Society as the Society of the Golden and Rosy Cross. And the naming took place immediately after and as a result of the excommunication of Queen Elizabeth I by a papal bull issued by the Pope on 25th of February 1570. And the papal excommunication was intended as an exhortation to the Roman Catholic nations of Europe to invade Europe, depose the Queen, probably kill her, and replace the Church of England with the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the excommunication, together with the return from France in 1570 of Sir Henry Lee, the Queen's champion, inspired a fervour for an elaboration of the Queen's Accession Day tournaments, together with much poetry and drama. And these were to be a revival of the Arthurian Round Table tournaments, for which St. George, the Red Cross Knight and patron saint of England, is the archetypal knight who finds and wins the Holy Grail of truth. The Holy Grail was represented by the Queen, who was known as the Fairy Queen of the Round Table. Fairy, to the Celts, signified gods and goddesses as well as the lesser angels and nature spirits. I think it's important for us to know that. Kings and queens were treated as incarnations of these gods and goddesses. Hence, the Queen of England needed to present herself as a virgin, a term which originally meant pure, therefore holy, in the sense of pure in thought, word and deed, and had little to do with sexual relationships or childbearing, even though the Church preached otherwise. And this was the theme that the poets and artists of the day took up and promoted. Elizabeth, Queen of England, was a virgin queen. And Edmund Spenser, in his epic poem, The Fairy Queen, represents the Queen as Una, the one truth, and the Red Cross Knight as the Knight of Holiness. And the naming of the English Magian Society as the Golden and Rosy Cross Society was a reference to the emblems of St. George, which are the red cross and rose. And heraldically, red is the colour of the metal gold. So the red cross is the same as the gold cross, or golden cross. The gold cross represents the cross of light, the symbol of wisdom. And the rose symbolises beauty. And the union of the rose and the cross in sacrificial love is referred to as truth, or rather truth revealed, which is the knowledge of wisdom. And the knowledge of wisdom, or truth revealed, is symbolized by the blazing star. And the Society of the Golden Rosy Cross was the first of all the Magian societies of Europe to publicly give itself a Rosicrucian name. Now, in April 1573, Francis Bacon, aged 12, entered Trinity College, Cambridge University, accompanied by his 14-year-old brother Anthony Bacon. And that same year, whilst the supernova was still shining brightly, the Saturn-Jupiter opposition occurred on the 18th of November, with Jupiter on the cusp of Gemini-Taurus and Saturn opposite it on the cusp of Sagittarius-Scorpio. Now, this meant that the line between the two planets corresponded to the main axial diameter of the celestial zodiac. Hence, it was like stringing the bow of the Milky Way, the bow that symbolizes Cupid's bow, which can shoot creative arrows of love. Not only this, but with Jupiter on the cusp of Gemini-Taurus, where the Milky Way meridian crosses the ecliptic, whilst the supernova in Cassiopeia blazed away, indicated that the Milky Way, emblematic of the Egyptian goddess Nut, was being impregnated with the creative light of wisdom and mercy by swallowing the light. You can see her swallowing the light, the sun, represented by the sun there. And this meant that, if successful, the goddess would become pregnant, and after a period of gestation would give birth to a Horus child of light. You can see the Horus child of light being born there, what I'm pointing to. To the ancient Egyptians, Horus was symbolized as a falcon, but to the Elizabethans and other Europeans, whose main myth was Dionysian and whose religion was Christian, the symbol of this child of light was a swan. To the English Rosicross Magi, this marked the beginning of what could become a blazing star if a sufficiently good labour of love was carried out on Earth in harmony with the ensuing sequence of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions. And concurrently with all this, Francis Bacon received the great vision of his life's work, the work that was to become the Rosy Cross work, in which all the arts and sciences were to be reformed, leading to a worldwide enlightenment or knowledge of truth. And this was to be an international expansion of Sir Nicholas Bacon's more nationally orientated advancement of learning educational project. And Francis's brother Anthony vowed to assist in this work, and the two brothers dedicated themselves to this project, with themselves representing the Gemini brothers. Then, just as 1573 marked the creative beginning in terms of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions, so 1574 marked its twin, the responsive strength and support that is needed. So the years go in twins. You know, 1 year is followed by the next year, which is its twin, and carries on like that. So during 1574, while still at university, the project was worked out in more detail. Now, going forward 10 years, on 2nd of May 1583, a Saturn-Jupiter great conjunction occurred in the water sign of Pisces. It was 20 degrees Pisces, so not too far from the cusp with Aries. And 2 months prior to this, the acting company Queen Elizabeth's Men was founded in March at the express command of Queen Elizabeth. Consisting of 12 founding members, it was the first large company of actors in English Renaissance theatre, which enabled it to perform new kinds of play, in particular history plays. And it was the dominant acting company for the rest of the 1980s, just as the Lord Chamberlain's Men and the Lord Admiral's Men would be in the decade that followed. Also in 1583, Sir Thomas Smith's book, De Republica Anglorum, The Manner of Government or Policy of the Realm of England, was posthumously published for the first time. And this was a discourse on the Commonwealth of England, on its governmental procedures, social institutions, and judicial system, and how it differs from other commonwealths, particularly in common law, which is derived from ancient British Celtic law, whereas countries like France, Italy, Spain, and Germany followed the civil law of the Romans. I mean, nowadays it's gradually changing. And Smith suggests that there is a natural evolution from autocratic kingship to aristocratic constitution to democratic government, from autocracy to aristocracy to democracy, with what is most appropriate at any time depending on each country. And this book immediately became an influential work on the nature of politics and constitutional law in Elizabethan England, and would become one of the most influential political philosophical texts in the Western world. Pretty important. Then in June 1583, Sir Humphrey Gilbert sailed from Dartmouth, Devon, to establish a colony in North America, which he managed to do when he called at St. John's Harbour in 1583 on the island of Newfoundland. However, the first truly permanent colony was John Guy's settlement at Cupid's Conception Bay in Newfoundland in 1610. And for this, Francis Bacon seems to have been the guiding spirit, as a tercentenary commemorative stamp was issued in 1910 depicting Francis Bacon as the guiding spirit in colonization scheme. Now, also in 1583, in September, the Magus John Dee, together with Edward Kelly and their 2 families, set out from England in the company of the Polish nobleman Albert Laski to visit Poland, after which they went on to visit other European countries. This is all to mark the Great Conjunction. Then in March 1584, the twin year to 1583, Francis Bacon visited Scotland on behalf of the Queen, and also his involvement in high politics started that year when he wrote his first political memorandum, a letter of advice to Queen Elizabeth, in which he offered a proposal for a new system of the sciences that emphasized empirical methods, thereby laying the foundation for an applied science. But the Queen was not supportive, so he had to carry on with just his few friends. So during the rest of the year, Bacon busied himself with composing his Temporis Partum Maximum, meaning the greatest birth of time, which was his first attempt at what was later to be developed into the Great Instauration, which became the Rosicrucian work. And as you can see from this title page, the twin great pillars of the Gemini are portrayed as all-important, with the ship Argo sailing between them on the middle way. Then skipping on 10 years. Towards the end of 1592, two twin novae appeared in Cassiopeia, followed in 1593 and 1594 by a series of 5 Saturn-Jupiter oppositions. Can you see twin novae in Cassiopeia and Jupiter there, opposed by Saturn, which is opposite? The twin novae in Cassiopeia confirmed to the Bacon brothers that the Spear-Shaker Gemini theme had heavenly support and could now be made public. And the 5 Saturn-Jupiter oppositions, which started on the 3rd of April 1593, occurred with Capricorn moving from Capricorn to Aquarius and Saturn moving from Cancer to Leo as the series proceeded, which meant that on average Jupiter was on the cusp of Capricorn Aquarius and Saturn was on the opposite cusp of Cancer Leo. Now these two cusps are the second most important cusps in the zodiac. The first most important being the cusps of Gemini Taurus and Sagittarius Scorpio, which were involved in the 1573 Saturn-Jupiter opposition. Now this importance is because astrologically Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn, and Cancer is ruled by the Moon and Leo by the Sun. So, as an echo of this, in 1593 the Shakespeare work was born with the publication of Venus and Adonis, with the name William Shakespeare signing the dedication as the author. And this was the first time the name had been printed as the author on any of the Shakespeare works. And besides the AA headpiece heading the dedication, the title of the poem was chosen with care, so that the initial capital letters V and A, or Venus and Adonis, when integrated together, produce Solomon's seal. This cipher is shown clearly by the title printed on the title page, and the way the title is printed in all capitals actually produces 2 V's and 2 A's, alluding to the 2 sets of twins of Leda and the Swan, with the V's smaller than the A's. Then above the title is another revealing headpiece, whilst below the title are 2 Latin lines from Ovid's Amores, meaning loves, which proclaims the aim of the spear-shaking Gemini twins and their companions. Vilia Merita Vulgus, mihi flavus Apollo, pocula Castalia plena ministret aqua, which translated means, let the vulgar crowd admire base things, let golden Apollo serve me cups full of Castalian water. And the Castalian water is from the sacred spring that issues from the side of double-peaked Mount Parnassus, the seats of Apollo the sun god and Athena the 10th muse, on the slopes of which lies the Delphic oracle. The Castalian water was said to both purify and inspire. And the double peaks of Parnassus and the initial capital letters of the names of Apollo and Athena render the double A twice. Then in 1594, the twin year to 1593, Lucrece was published, also with the name William Shakespeare signing the dedication. And except for the title Lucrece, the title page is similar to that of Venus and Adonis, but the dedication differs both in wording and print, and it has no AA headpiece. However, there is the same printed name William Shakespeare at the end of the dedication. But there were 2 Shakespeares, 2 poets, 2 Gemini twins. So this Lucrece William Shakespeare is not the same William Shakespeare as the Venus and Adonis William Shakespeare. Moreover, the name William Shakespeare is a pseudonym meaning golden helmeted spear shaker, which refers directly to a Gemini knight of the helmet. Now, just as the 2 years 1593 and 1594 twin each other, so also do the two poems Venus and Adonis and Lucrece twin each other. Moreover, both poems are about a mortal-immortal twinship. Venus and Adonis is about a mortal man and a queen who is likened to an immortal goddess. And the Rape of Lucrece is about a mortal woman and a prince who thinks he is an immortal god, like his father, the Tarquin king. And this is because historically kings and queens were supposed to be incarnations of gods and goddesses. And the goddess and god referenced in these two poems are Venus and Mars. In the Shakespeare poem Venus and Adonis personifies the Tudor queen Elizabeth I as the goddess Venus, with Adonis being an example of an attractive young man uninterested in women who prefers the excitement of hunting the boar. However, the tragedy that befell Adonis when he was slain by the boar, the flower that sprang up from the blood-stained ground, and Venus's grief and outpouring of love turns the tragedy into something better. And the boar, the death of Adonis, and the flower reference the classical mysteries. And Adonis himself references Henry Wriothesley, the young Earl of Southampton, to whom the poem is dedicated. In the second Shakespeare poem, The Rape of Lucrece, it was the son of the last Tarquin king who raped Lucrece, and the Tarquin kings of Rome who were likened to the god Mars. However, this historical tragedy led to the overthrow of the Tarquin autocracy and the establishment of the more democratic Roman Republic. So both poems are about the autocracy of kings and queens, as well as about lust and its opposite, and how tragedy transforms the situation. The implied suggestion, though, is that there could be better ways than tragedy of transforming things to something more harmonious and peaceful. And educated people of the time would have recognized that the poems relate to the classical myths of Mars and Venus, which mostly deal with such like problems that seem to afflict humanity from age to age, all except one myth whose story is about true love. And the positive classical myth concerning Mars and Venus is that they were lovers for eternity, faithful to each other, and produced Harmony and Cupid as their children, whom they lovingly look after and protect. So these two Shakespeare poems, Venus and Adonis and Lucrece, are tragedies, but both stories, by means of an outpouring of love via grief, lead on to something better. And in terms of the Shakespeare works, all that follows is an in-depth study of human emotion, desire, thought, and action, with indicators of how it can all be made harmonious and loving for each and everyone. Now going forward another 10 years. On March the 24th, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I of England died and was succeeded by King James VI of Scotland, who was crowned King James I of England on the 25th of July 1603, thereby uniting the crowns of the two countries. And on 17th of December 1603, a Saturn-Jupiter great conjunction occurred in the fire sign of Sagittarius. The great conjunction was in 8 degrees Sagittarius, therefore close to the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp. And this was at the same time as a nova was shining in Cygnus the Swan, which had first been sighted in 1600, but had grown brighter by 1603. This nova in Cygnus announced that Nut, the sky goddess, who was symbolized by the Milky Way, was about to give birth to her swan baby, the swan being the emblem of a great master soul, a being of light. And all this corresponded with Paracelsus's prophecy, which referred to a great light, Elias the artist, who would appear at this time and who would enable all knowledge to be revealed. And Paracelsus added that the appearance of this great light would be the sign and harbinger of the approaching revolution. Now this was followed the next year by a dramatic massing of Mars with Saturn and Jupiter in Sagittarius, during which a Saturn-Mars conjunction took place on the 26th of September 1604, followed by a Jupiter-Mars conjunction on the 10th of October 1604. And all this was highly important because not only is the massing of all three planets very rare, but also the great conjunction and massing took place in the far sign of Sagittarius the Archer, emblematic of the enlightened centaur Chiron, who knows the truth and teaches others. In addition, this also marked the beginning of a new Trigonolus series. However, what gave this great conjunction and planetary massing in Sagittarius and the nova in Cygnus an even greater significance was the sudden and dramatic appearance on September 1604 of a supernova in Ophiuchus, the Serpent Master, that is traditionally known as the 13th sign of the zodiac. And because the Ophiuchus supernova was observed and written about by the German astronomer Johannes Kepler, it is referred to as Kepler's star. The Ophiuchus supernova appeared close to the massing of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars in Sagittarius, all of which were near the cusp of Scorpio-Sagittarius and also the heart of the Milky Way galaxy. And the supernova was bright enough to be seen during the day for over 3 weeks, and at night it outshone all the stars and planets except for Venus. And the supernova continued to dominate the night sky for 17 months, after which it faded away. And it was the last supernova observed in our Milky Way galaxy, no other having been seen since in our galaxy. It's worth noting that. In British mythology, Ophiuchus is the 13th seat of the Arthurian Round Table, the seat of the heir to the throne of Britain. And to the Magi, this signaled that the Swan Child, referred to as Elias the artist by Paracelsus, was now fully born and incarnate, as the position of the supernova and planetary massing was the birthplace of the goddess Nut's swan baby, where the baby would land and take its first breath, with the dark rift in the Milky Way marking the gap between the goddess's legs. And this birthplace corresponds to the central area of the Milky Way galaxy, where the great conjunction, planetary massing and supernova appearance were all occurring. The Swan Child, represented by Cygnus the Swan, is symbolic of the ascended master soul, the supreme poet who can sound or sing the word of God as an individual creator who has become one with the universal creator. Both Orpheus and Jesus Christ, for instance, were symbolized as swans when they ascended to heaven. And to be born again like this is synonymous with what is called a second coming. Oops. Now, in the British landscape zodiac, this swan birth corresponded with the location of London and St Albans. The English Rosicrucians knew this landscape zodiac well and worked with it, which meant that they had a heaven and earth confirmation that the prophesied Elias the artist really was Francis Bacon. It also provided the signal to the Rosicrucian fraternity, led by Francis Bacon, that now is the time for their work, which had been prepared in secret since 1572, to be made public and to be extended beyond England into the rest of Europe and eventually the whole world. And we should note, as the Magi did, that all the planetary and stellar phenomena that occurred in the Milky Way from 1572 to 1604 embraced the whole Milky Way from the Gemini-Taurus cusp to the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp. Moreover, their sequence of appearance corresponded to 1. The fertilization of the goddess Nut, 2. The gestation of the fetus in her womb, and 3. The birth of her child of light. It was a huge mystery that had occurred, which had been and would be acted out on Earth in the British landscape as an echo of what had occurred in the sky. So you can see the movement through the British landscape zodiac. However, the Solomon seal marked out by the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions and oppositions had not yet been completed. There was still work to be done. But in 1605, immediately after the 1604 celestial display, Francis Bacon published his Advancement and Proficience of Learning, Divine and Human, thereby starting to make the Rosicrucian work public. Then on 23rd of August 1613, 3 Saturn-Jupiter oppositions took place, with Jupiter in Virgo and Saturn opposite in Pisces. On St. Valentine's Day, 14th of February 1613, the marriage of Princess Elizabeth, King James I of England's eldest daughter, with the German Prince Frederick V, Elector Palatine, took place. And the next day, 15th of February 1613, as part of the marriage celebrations, a masque called the Marriage of the Thames and Rhine was presented to the newlywed couple and royal court by the gentlemen lawyers of Gray's Inn and the Inner Temple. And this masque, although written by Francis Beaumont, was contrived, organised and produced by Sir Francis Bacon, the treasurer of Gray's Inn. And notably the masque included 2 anti-masks, the second of which was reproduced later that year, slightly simplified, in the Shakespeare play The Two Noble Kinsmen. And in the following twin year, 1614, the first Rosicrucian manifesto, Fama Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis, the fame of the Rosicross fraternity, was published in Kassel, Germany, under the auspices of Moritz, the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, whose lands bordered the Palatinate. Moritz, who is styled the Learned, was an Anglophile and an enthusiastic supporter of the performing arts. He was a patron of English strolling players and had built a roofed theatre, the Ottoneum, at Kassel, which was the first to be built in what was to become Germany. And Moritz not only maintained close connections with England, but had helped bring about the marriage of Prince Frederick and Princess Elizabeth. And the Fama was followed in 1615 with the publication in Frankfurt of the second Rosicrucian manifesto, Confessio Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis, the Confession of the Rosicross Fraternity. And these twin Rosicrucian manifestos declared that the 1604 celestial display had marked the opening of the tomb of Fra CRC, the founding father of the Rosicrucian fraternity, to reveal him and his books. And in this way, Fra Christian Rosicross was equated with Elias the artist. Then on 16th of July 1623, an extremely close Saturn-Jupiter great conjunction occurred in the fire sign of Leo. And when Saturn and Jupiter are extremely close, the great conjunction is considered extra special. Now, in the autumn of 1623, Francis Bacon's De Dignitate et Augmenta Scientiarum and the Shakespeare First Folio were published as twin folios, echoing on Earth the Saturn-Jupiter great conjunction in the heavens. And this was followed the next year, 1624, with the publication of the great cipher manual Cryptomenitites et Cryptographiae by Gustavus Solanus. Gustavus Solanus was the pseudonym of Duke Augustus of Brunswick-Lüneburg. And Solanus can refer to the moon Selene or to Silenus, the centaur who was, as a member of Dionysus's retinue, a companion and tutor of Dionysus. And the Italian name for Dionysus, who was known to the Romans as Bacchus, was Bacco, which was Bacon's name in Italian. And the bottom panel of the title page cryptically shows Francis Bacon as the second Trithemius, the leader of the Rosy Cross fraternity. And the brethren of the Rosy Cross were known as moon men. And in the introductory poems of Cryptomenitites, the author, Duke Augustus, is described as Homo Lunae, meaning moon man or man of the moon. Now, the 1623 Great Conjunction was the final one of a 60-year series of Saturn-Jupiter Great Conjunctions and oppositions that began in 1563, and which were accompanied with highly meaningful and well-timed novas and supernovas. And the 1623 Great Conjunction completed marking the 6 points of the Solomon's heel that was made a blazing star by the work on Earth of the Rosy Cross fraternity. But to complete the 60-year circle takes us to 1633. And therein lies the question, did Francis Bacon really die on Easter Day 1626, or did he live on? So with that question, I'll end my talk and stop the screen sharing. And we'll end the recording there. I hope you've enjoyed it.